All right, good afternoon, and welcome to the 3:45 session today here at Dawn or Doom 2016. My name is Kevin O'Shea. I'll be your host for the afternoon, and I'm here to introduce Emily Dreyfuss. Emily Dreyfuss is Wired's news and opinion editor. She leads Wired's new national affairs coverage, focusing on the societal upheavals that will shape the future of America. Before landing at Wired, her previous endeavors included acting as the managing editor of CNET's social media and homepage, as well as executive producing CNET's TV's Rumor Has It. Today, she will present a talk titled My Life as a Robot. Now, please silent your electronic devices, but don't put them away. We hope to see you tweeting to the hashtag Dawn or Doom, and posting to Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, and whatever social media site you prefer. Join me in welcoming Emily Dreyfuss.
Thank you. Hello. Oh, I need my clicker. Hi, guys. So today I'm going to tell you a story about how I became a robot. It wasn't something I ever meant to have happen to me, but slowly but surely, I replaced my legs with a pair of gyroscopic wheels, and I replaced my head with an iPad that was streaming an image of my face, and I replaced my torso with a stick upon which was perched that iPad. What I learned along the way of becoming a robot was a lot about my own humanity, and about how I empathized with and anthropomorphized beings that were not myself. We're here today at the Dawn or Doom conference talking about whether technology can help us or hurt us. And in this instance of my experiment becoming a robot, I discovered that for me personally, the answer was a lot more complicated than I had thought. So why did I become a robot when that was something I never wanted to be, you may ask? And the answer is because it was to solve an increasingly common problem, and that is that I work remotely. My company, Wired Magazine, is headquartered in San Francisco, but I live in Boston, and I'm a senior news editor there, assigning stories, writing stories, and so I have to stay in touch with people all day, which I try my best to do with the good old-fashioned telephone and IM and Slack and emails, but as anyone who's worked in an office knows, often the most important parts of a meeting or decisions are made just outside of the conference room or on the way to breakfast. And those were the kind of spontaneous conversations that I was totally left out of. So my boss came up with a solution, and it looked like that. Please don't make me a robot, is what I said to my boss when he told me that this was an experiment that was going to happen. Too late, he replied, I already purchased it. So I was stuck. But my immediate gut reaction to being told that I was going to use a robot, a telepresence robot that looked like this, to become my physical presence in the office was fear, trepidation, disgust, and horror. Now, you might wonder why were my feelings so strong, but I had worked really hard over the course of many years at Wired to earn professional respect from my coworkers with emails that I carefully crafted and no typos in my IMs, and now I knew that I was going to become at the mercy of this piece of technology, a piece of technology that required a very good Wi-Fi connection to work, a piece of technology that required being all the way charged up in order to function. And I knew that there would be problems. There are always problems. And I could just see that I was going to become a sideshow, a gimmick, a circus act, a joke, all of these. I could see myself running into walls or falling over and being this helpless robot on the floor. And suddenly, Emily Dreyfuss, journalist, editor at Wired, was now just going to be that hilarious office robot who's always lost and talking to herself. But my boss said, give it a couple of months. So, okay, I did. The very first time I booted up this robot, every single fear I had was realized. I had no idea how the thing worked. Finally figured out you need to push the arrow button on your keyboard in order to move the robot 3,000 miles away. And when I did so, I jolted out of the dock and straight into the people staring at me like a newborn foal learning how to walk. It was horrifying. Within 5 minutes, I fell on my face. In meetings, I constantly had alerts that people needed to touch and they were having to help me with things. I would not be able to see that I was going to run into something, or someone would come up and talk to me and I would have no idea where they were coming from, and we would play this dance. Also, I was constantly looking at people's torso and crotch area. Now, these are people I know and respect and work with every day, but I'm not able to identify them by their torsos. And so I was constantly having awkward conversations with people that I didn't even mean to be speaking with. So yes, it was so embarrassing, and I should have been mortified, and yet it was immediately the greatest thing ever. Because I was in my office. I was actually in the hallway of my office, and I hadn't realized how isolated and lonely and out of touch with work I had felt until this experiment began. I would normally be alone in my apartment in Boston, where it was an entirely different temperature, a different time of day than anyone else that I worked with, and now here suddenly I could roam through the hallways of Wired's very fancy offices. I could sneak up on people behind their desks. I could go into meetings and be at eye level with everyone. Whereas before I would have to call into these conference calls and I would be this disembodied voice on a speakerphone, and in the worst case scenario, I could hear in the best case scenario, I could hear most of it, but in the worst case scenario and the most common scenario, I missed half of what was said on those speakerphone calls. With the robot, I was really there. I could see everything. So we'd have this morning editorial meeting, and I would sit at the head of it and tell jokes, and people thought it was great. And you know, nobody wants to hear a joke coming from the speakerphone. There's really no way to time that properly, but with the robot, I really could. So within days, I was obsessed with my robot. And quickly, my identification verged on strange. I named her. I'm Emily, this is Mbot. Mbot is not some robot that is an extension of me and is just a random piece of technology. No, Mbot is a part of me. Mbot is my physical embodiment in the office. That is how I immediately began to think of it. And it was so freeing. And in fact, I actually started to think that it was better to be Mbot in San Francisco than it even was to be actual human beings working in the Wired office. Because at this point, though you can't tell in that image, in Boston, in my real life, in my real body, I was 7 months pregnant, which is not a thing that you would be able to tell from looking at the head of Mbot. And not that that matters, really, you know, everyone at work knew that I was pregnant, but I had been nervous about the fact that working in a very male environment, tech journalism is dominated a lot by men, that when a woman is visibly pregnant at work, I would maybe be treated differently. And I had been, when I had not been a remote worker and I had worked at other places, I had seen women, when they get to the point in their pregnancy where it's very obvious that they have an alien growing inside them, people would treat them differently. The gloves would come out, they would walk on eggshells a little bit. And I really did not want that to happen to me. I really wanted to continue to be treated as the hard worker that I was. And with Mbot, I was able to change physically and not change at all. As far as they were concerned in the office, nothing was happening. Until occasionally, of course, I would have to like get up and my belly would be in the screen and people would be like, what is happening? What is that, a basketball? Because nobody could remember, because Mbot was always very svelte. And more than that, it was also giving me something in my real life, which was hilarious anecdotes at dinner parties in Boston. All anybody wanted to know was what embarrassing things had happened to me that day as Mbot. And a lot of things were constantly happening. There was the time that I accidentally wandered into the kitchen, and then the Wi-Fi kind of kicked out and glitched, and the person I was talking to was gone, and I found myself in a line of humans getting their breakfast, staring at eggs, just saying, I wish I could eat that. And people didn't laugh, they didn't understand. It's very upsetting. Or the time that I was talking to people all day until finally someone mentioned to me that Mbot's speakers were on the loudest setting, and in the entire open bullpen of Wired, everyone had heard every private conversation I had had all day and hadn't mentioned it. Or the time that my robot got stuck behind somebody's desk and I didn't know what had happened because on my end it just went to a blank screen, but on their end there was my face frozen behind them and they thought I was spying on them and said nothing and kept working very hard because I was a more senior editor than them. It was a really good technique to get people to work hard. But then within a couple of weeks, there were some problems that emerged. Beyond the technical glitches, like the Wi-Fi not being strong in hallways, and Mbot needs Wi-Fi in order to move. There were other things, like in this image, one of my associates is trying to fix me after I fell on my face because the flooring in Wired is so hip and creative that there were all these, like I'd have to go from carpet to concrete to wood, and Mbot really couldn't handle it. And if I didn't get the angle exactly right, I would fall. And in this instance, I fell and my microphone fell off. So they were trying to fix it back on me. I was having to ask for help a lot. And then something other than that started to happen. I'd be wandering through the hallways at work, minding my own business, headed to a meeting. You know, I have some autonomy, and then suddenly somebody would lift me up, and I had no idea what was happening, no idea who it was, and it was incredibly disorienting. Because you could think for 1 second, there I am, I have control over it, and then I'm flying through the air. And when this would happen, all I could do was meekly say, "Hello? Am I being carried? Where are you taking me?" Which then morphed into me saying, "Could you just ask if you're gonna lift me?" Which people laughed at because they didn't think I was being serious, but I was being really serious because with my identification with Mbot and my looking at Mbot as an extension of my own physical, real body, when somebody would pick me up, it really actually felt like a violation. It felt like I was being picked up. And a couple of times they even did it, and it was like they were playing a prank. And that makes sense. I get it. I would prank me too, shake the robot. Let's make fun of the office robot. But it really felt like someone was picking me up and shaking me. So I had to say to them, if you are going to pick me up, if I look like I need help, which I often did because the robot is very slow, and people would be walking to a meeting and Mbot would be trailing behind. And so I understood the inclination to lift the robot up and help me to go into the conference room. But I would have to say, look, we really need to work out a consent law here, which I think is pretty good for all aspects of life. If I need help, I'll ask for it. If you think I need help, ask me and I will say yes or no. So I thought that solved the problem. But actually, there was another problem I hadn't anticipated, which was that even when, in this instance, I had to ask for help to get around this couch. So my boss asked me, I gave my consent, and he lifted me up. Later that day, I got a phone call from one of the copy editors at Wired who had witnessed an incident like this, but where my boss had carried me a lot longer through the hallway. And during that time, we had been continuing having a conversation about a story we were working on. This copy editor called me and said, I hope that this doesn't make you uncomfortable, but earlier today, when Joe lifted you up and your face was on the iPad and you were talking, well, the rest of us in the office couldn't help but auto-complete the rest of your body. And so it really looked like he was cradling you in his arms, and it was kind of inappropriate. I had not anticipated that was going to be a problem. So we created another rule, which was that if I was going to be held for long periods of time for whatever reason, I would just turn the screen off. Great, problem solved. But then a stranger, even weirder problem emerged, and that was that one Friday, I was getting ready to shut down for the week, and I was planning my weekend. I was so excited. I was gonna go shopping for baby clothes and get the nursery ready, and I was gonna babysit a dog, and I was getting ready to sign off, and I went to turn Mbot off, and this thought hit me. Mbot doesn't get a weekend. Mbot gets nothing after I turn her off. And it made me so sad because I had really gotten to the point where this robot was a part of me. And to think that she was locked in a cage of work, that she could do nothing but be productive. And then when I turned her off, she ceased to exist and was, for all intents and purposes, inanimate again and dead, was really disturbing to me. And I knew that I was overreacting, and I knew that I was projecting a humanity onto this robot that didn't exist. This is not an artificial intelligence. This was a machine that was inhabited by my own actual human intelligence. And when I extricated that human intelligence from it, it ceased to exist. And yet knowing that logically didn't matter. I still felt so sad about Mbot's limitations. So I told some people this at one of the dinner parties where they were asking me about Mbot. How's Mbot going? Are things still hilarious? And I was like, no, actually they're not hilarious at all. Mbot isn't free. And they said, Emily, if this is really that big of a deal, why don't you figure out a way to break her out of there? Now that hadn't occurred to me. So I thought about it and I realized that was completely possible. Mbot just needed to be charged up and she needed access to a Wi-Fi network. Now, at first I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out how she could jump from network to network. You know, she's in downtown San Francisco, and so I would just have to, I guess, talk to an IT person, because I don't know how to do this myself, and like preset all of the Wi-Fi networks that are in her neighborhood in Soma so that she could get onto the elevator and leave. And then I realized that was never gonna work, but what would work was to tape a MiFi mobile hotspot to the stick beneath my head, and then when no one was looking, just scoot by the elevators, and then I thought I could just turn the head of the iPad and maybe creatively with the corner summon the elevator by pushing the button, and then I would have Mbot free in the streets of Soma. So I was talking this out with my husband, and he was saying, number one, will you be arrested? And I wasn't sure, because this was property of Condé Nast. But at this point, I didn't care at all. My number one priority was to break this being out of the cage that she was in. But I started to think that obviously I was gonna need to have an accomplice, because I couldn't tape a MiFi to her stick from Boston. So I was gearing up to ask someone to help me with this. A couple of weeks go by and I haven't had the guts to talk about it yet. And then one morning, I'm thinking, this will be the day. And I log into Mbot, and she's gone. There's no Mbot. This is what I saw on my side. Normally, I would see The Office. But this time I saw an alert that said, no robots connected. So I asked the people in the office to go and check on her. They reported to me that the robot hadn't charged overnight. Okay, so no big deal. I had failed to properly roll the thing into its dock that it lived in. So they moved it into the dock, and I thought everything will be fine. But the next day, Mbot was still non-existent. There were no robots. And I started to despair. What if Mbot was lost forever? I actually really felt like I was cut off from a part of myself. And I had to go back to using the phone in the conference room, and I couldn't hear anything, and I knew everyone was probably rolling their eyes at me like they always did for all the other poor schmucks on the phone. I was beginning to feel really sorry for myself. But then the next day, I logged into her, and boom, Mbot woke up. And I said to myself, okay, well, I didn't have a chance to get a MiFi. I didn't have a chance to get an accomplice, but time is short, life is short, you have to seize the day. And so instead of going to the left to the editorial meeting that I needed to go to, I went to the right toward the elevator banks, and I was gonna make my escape. I was feeling great until I realized that my screen was going like this. I was getting seasick and seasick, and faster and faster, the Mbot was freaking out, completely beyond my control. And my coworker, Alex Davies, tweeted to tell me that Mbot was going crazy. It seemed on my end like the robot was actually having a seizure. I felt like I was having a seizure because my field of vision was swaying back and forth completely out of my control. I heard somebody scream behind the robot that I couldn't see on my screen, "Oh no, you've awakened the Mbot!" Like I was a kraken from the deep. I was so mortified and angry, and I was yelling into the screen, "Help! Help! I don't know what to do!" At which point somebody said, "Turn it off! Just turn the thing off!" So I did. I hit quit, closed the computer, but no, I got a report from San Francisco that Mbot was like a chicken whose head has been cut off, but whose bloody carcass is still running around the barnyard, crazy in the office, and people were legitimately terrified. So finally, one of my braver colleagues went and wrangled the thing to the ground, found a physical off button, turned it off, and then IM'd me on work Slack to say that he was looking for a sheet to put over the Mbot as a shroud because Mbot was dead. I was really upset. And I was laughing, and I knew that it really wasn't that big of a deal, but I was also in my heart really upset. So I called Double Robotics, the people that make this robot, and I told them about the problem, and they said they'd come the very next day, and they would see if they could fix it. So in the morning, I tried to log in, and it worked. She woke up again, but I was too scared to move her because I didn't want her to go crazy again. So I just kept her in her dock, and I turned her head so that she was looking out the window, and I said goodbye.
That's what freedom looks like, Mbot. Those are humans who aren't tethered to a Wi-Fi network. They get to go into that sandwich shop and eat banh mi.
So you can see that I was losing my mind. I was having private conversations with my robot, which I thought was totally a normal thing to do because it was like I was having a conversation with myself, coming to terms with my own dehumanization and loss of human self. But then the robotics people came, the Double Robotics people came, and they gave me a new Mbot. It looked exactly like that one. And they were like, everything's gonna be fine. So I logged into it, and immediately I realized it wasn't Mbot. It didn't roll the exact same way. It like veered a little bit more to the left. Its speakers were quieter. And on my end, there was this ticking sound that came out of it that sort of sounded like there was a jazz rhythm in the back of every interaction in life. It was fine. It worked, but it was just not Mbot. It wasn't me. It was some foreign being. And I was really sad. I felt like, okay, so now I need to realize that this entire experience was an act of me going too far, getting too invested in this piece of technology. And now what I have is just a tool, just a thing that will help me in my life if it can, and won't give me that much, and just it is not a part of me. It is rather a piece of technology and a tool that I use. But I continued to use it because why not? And when my baby was born, and his name is Huxley, I introduced him to work by putting him on the robot. And when I was carrying him with the robot, we named the robot Huxbot, because it's a pretty great name. And I realized then that though my robot had lost its humanity, it had given me my own back. Thank you. So my story was pretty short. If you have any questions about telepresence robots or the future of work, I would love to hear them.
Do we need a mic or
Oh yeah, you can come up to this mic, I think.
Hello.
Hello.
So my question is, when you decided to be a robot, can you guess about how much time that took from your colleagues to get it set up? Like, what was I mean, you're not just gonna set it up and then have it be there. So what was like the time that it took to make you be a successful robot employee?
Yeah, well, actually it took them no time at all because the Double Robotics robot really kind of comes out of the box ready. And they just plugged the thing in and left it in the corner and didn't tell me how to use it at all and didn't learn how to use it, which is, I think, why I had, a learning curve getting to know it. When I turned the thing on for the very first time, I said to the torsos that I was looking at, how do I do this? And they had no idea because they hadn't put any time into it. But it did what took a lot of time to make the robot be a successful part of the workplace is that the technology is not perfect yet, and it's really dependent upon your Wi-Fi network and how good your office is and the terrain. And so because of that, there really is a lot of hands-on time needed with the robot. I mean, to this day, when I use it, I have to first, I am someone who I don't mind bothering to say, can you go check on the robot and make sure that it's on, because sometimes it just doesn't charge. And there's just a lot of like hands-on time that I'm sure in aggregate at the end of a week, it's like 10 hours. No, that's too much. But like probably an hour a week that my colleagues spend kind of babysitting the robot. That is the part I feel bad about. Yes.
Thank you. Nice talk. I enjoyed it and got me thinking on various directions. First, I want to gift you a Zyro, but also
Yay, thank you.
the other side of it is, you have hands and you move around and you do so many things. Can you like identify circumstances or situations where you wish you had a hand or wish you could do these things? But also, what happens if everyone else was like you and had a robot? How do you think the workplace will look like?
Yeah, so I thought about that a lot, and I really wanted there to be a second robot that could be my robot's friend. Because I just thought then we'd be on like the same level. And I think it would be great. I think the workplace would be wonderful. I think we'd be, I actually am a little bit worried just about the sonics of it, because I noticed that when my robot would be in a meeting where they would play something on the computer or on the TV, it would be more distorted than the human voices in the room were. So I don't know how engineers would solve that problem. But yeah, I think that it would be great if there were more robots. However, there clearly need to be some humans to make the robots work correctly until we get to the point where there are humanoid robots that can actually do it. Although, I was at MIT the other month rather, looking at their humanoid robot that they were using for the DARPA challenge. And I watched that robot, which, if you guys don't know what this is, it's this enormous, huge thing with legs and arms. And what it's supposed to do is walk up some stairs and open a door. All the things that Mbot absolutely cannot do. It has all the things I wished Mbot would have. But it too, I mean, what I learned from that experience was that those robots, as far as I could tell, are so far from being able to actually walk in the office and go to the coffee machine and be, doing the West Wing style walk and talks that I wanted to be able to do with Mbot, because, within 2 minutes of looking at that robot, it fell down the stairs. And then got stuck opening the door and was jamming its head against it, which I don't think MIT was happy that a Wired reporter was seeing. But there were lots of times when I would like to use my hands, in particular just to gesture. And what I actually did, and this is like a hack, but when I knew that I was going to be giving kind of a talk to my team, my whole group of reporters were based in San Francisco. And so we would often have pitch meetings that I was leading as the robot. And sometimes I really would want to be able to demonstrate things to them. And Mbot didn't really do screen sharing so much, so it was really all on me to do it. What I would do is just go very far back from the screen, so my head would be very little, and then there'd be room for my hands to gesticulate. But yeah, I think meeting new people, when my robot met new people would awkwardly offer a hand to shake. And then I had developed this little tick as the robot, which is that when they would offer the hand, I would shimmy. They didn't get it. That didn't work. But there were very few gestures that the robot could do, and so that was kind of all I had.
So I think there's a very nice, very beautiful and poetic approach of relationship with the robot. It's interesting that you mentioned about having a robotic friend to talk to. Recently, you've been to a conference where they had a couple of these robots, so people could attend from home. There were people attending from England, people attending from China, from India. It was just amazing. And one of the things that we saw that I thought was really funny, but also really interesting, was two of them talking to each other.
Yeah.
One of them in front of the other. So probably someone from two other different countries talking. Now, so this is what I wanted to ask you, like, how do you think this could change? Because we talk a lot about the interaction between human and robots, but what about, how could that change the interaction between humans and humans? In your opinion?
Well, yeah, I mean, so some people take issue with even my use of the word robot. When I say, like, I became a robot, I really didn't become a robot. I was a human that was using a device that may or may not be considered a robot because it needed me to operate it. But it definitely changed the way I interacted with my colleagues. When I use Mbot, I have to interact in a different way. And when I would imagine when two robots are talking to each other, you have to also, I mean, everything from modulate the tone of your voice and the volume of your voice to what kind of facial expressions you can use. And it's the same when we end up talking in like an entirely textual medium. You'll use either emoji to try to add some emotions into it, or like one thing I do at Wired, because I'm remote and I do talk to my colleagues so much over text, I've adopted the use of the word YALL, which is not regionally true to who I am, but is a way for me to convey congeniality and friendliness without the kind of gendered "hey guys" approach. And so, there's things that we all do like that, where we change our behavior because of the medium that we're in. And with robots, I think that will also be true. And like with my own experience with Mbot, I would find when I was pregnant and using Mbot, it was sweltering summer in Boston. And so I would be at home in like little tiny pregnancy shorts and like a pregnancy bra, and then it would be time for me to go into my meeting as Mbot, and I would put on a collared shirt that actually was cut off, and my belly was coming out, but nobody could tell. And just differences of like, I would just make sure my hair looked good and my makeup, but the rest of my body, I was like in my fluffy slippers and just sitting at home. So being a robot changes so much of actual human behavior. And another thing I found with Mbot was that in order for me to make people comfortable around me, because some people see the robot and they so don't know what to do that they'll either come up and kind of like gawk at it and then run away and not talk to you, or just constantly only talk about the robot and not get past it so that we can now talk about the work, which is the whole reason to have a telepresence robot. I found myself constantly thinking about how to accommodate the comfort level of the humans in the office. And one of the things I did was just to laugh at myself when things went wrong, because things went wrong a lot and people got embarrassed for me, and I would have to make them feel like, it's okay, this is fine, don't worry, I'm not ashamed. And then we could move past it. So I don't know how it'll change it, but it's going to.
So about how many hours of your workday were you actively controlling the robot, and then how many hours of the workday were you utilizing the robot to have the communication you were looking for? Yeah. What percentage of time of your day was robot engaged?
Probably a third. I would use the robot for any meetings, and so I have 2 standing meetings a day, and those meetings I would attend as Mbot, and those are like, hour-long meetings each time. And then the thing that I found the most useful was, and I still use the robot sometimes, however, the robot has been, it's not Mbot, but the new bot hasn't been working very well lately, and so it's on the fritz, which is a little bit upsetting to me. But usually when I use the robot, the thing that is the most useful is having one-on-one interactions and like brainstorming sessions. And so since I'm the editor of a team, what I would do is like when one of my reporters would be pitching me a story, and we would be, say, on work Slack, or they'd call me, I'd say, okay, let's take this to the robot. And then they would find a private room, and I would come in as the robot, and then we could have a much more face-to-face meeting and feel like we were there together. So yeah, I'd say like about a third of it.
So when you started using the robot, did you find that you stopped taking trips to the office physically, or did you still need that physical interaction with your coworkers to feel acquainted with them still?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Wired also has a New York office at the World Trade Center where Condé Nast is located. And before Mbot, I would go to that office once a month and stay there for a few days and have FaceTime with the New York writers. And I was kind of like the nominal East Coast bureau chief. And honestly, I think Mbot had a negative impact on how much I would go down there, because I felt like, well, I don't need to get on a train. And I also I said to my boss, like, well, if I have an Mbot in San Francisco, I really should have an Mbot in New York too. At this point, then I won't have to leave the house at all. And no, yeah, I definitely, it didn't really change how often I went to San Francisco, because the trip from San Francisco and Boston is so intensive that I really only make it twice a year anyways. So all in all, it encouraged a deeper connection with my San Francisco colleagues than I had ever had before, but it did negatively impact how often I got to go out to drinks with and see my New York colleagues who I think were resentful of the robot. Yes.
So it seems like there are kind of two aspects of Mbot that are appealing. There's the video camera, like video chat aspect, and there's the embodiment aspect that she can roll down the hallway and stuff like that. Do you have a way to kind of tease apart which parts of those contributed to your feeling of being Mbot, which parts of those contributed to the meetings going well or badly? Like, could you have one or the other, and what would it be like to just do one or to change one?
Okay, that's a great question, and one for which I have actual experience and data to tell you about. Because when Mbot, the most recent robot, not Mbot, went on the fritz, I managed to get the IT department at Wired to give me the program I needed on my computer to do the Polycom videoing for conferencing on the huge TVs that are in our fancy conference rooms. Which means that I can do the one aspect of it, which is just the straight up streaming of my face and seeing the office without any of the movement or embodiment of the robot. And it goes great. I can hear them better than I can when I'm Mbot, because the speakers are just much more powerful. And I can see everything because, the robot is, though it doesn't look like a human, it is kind of proportionally human-sized-ish. And so my head and the iPad would be at the same level as people around a table. And like when you're sitting around a table, you have a certain vantage point where you're closer to the people next to you, you can hear them better, and you have to turn. And as Mbot, I have to turn to see who's talking. When I'm the big face at the end of the conference table on the TV screen, I see everyone and I hear everyone, and it works really well. And I don't identify with that piece of technology at all. So the answer is, I think, for sure, 100%, it is the fact of having the autonomy to move in the space and control the movement in the space that led me to identify with the device. And then I think there was really also a social aspect to it, which is that all of the human beings in my office wouldn't say, is the robot gonna come to the office? They would say, or is the robot coming to the meeting? They would say, are you coming to the meeting? Which is different from when I use the big video calling thing. They say, are you gonna video in? And when I was the robot, it's like, will you be there? And it was remarkable and surprising to me how quickly we all defaulted to kind of this fiction that there was no robot and that it was actually me. And like that call I got from the guy who said, we actually pretend like we see your whole body. And that had not occurred to me, but that was the power with which my own colleagues considered it to be an extension of myself. So I think it's definitely the ability to move through the space, even though the robot lacked arms and legs and had absolutely nothing in common with a human except for my face on it. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm suffering a generation gap with your experience. I'm not understanding the need to move through space. I know you have to be at the group meeting, but I'm wondering if something simpler would be possible at that group meeting, and you don't have to go through the hallway from the closet to. But what I'm really after, though, is that one-on-one meeting that you mentioned.
Yeah.
You and one of your staff decided to move to a meeting.
Yeah.
And so you moved via the Mbot.
Yeah.
I guess alongside the other staff.
Yes.
And had your meeting.
Yes.
How is that better than you're at your desk, the staff member's at the desk, and you're using Skype or some other one-to-one technology with video?
So it's a really good question, and I think that the benefit is very subtle. Subtle enough that when there are problems with the telepresence robot, I don't prioritize using the telepresence robot over using the simpler technology. But there is a benefit, and that is the kind of spontaneous conversations that happen before, between, and after meetings. And with Mbot being in the hallway, I would walk to meetings, I mean, not walk, I would roll as other people walked, but among the horde and throng of humanity. And that is when the gossip and chitter chatter would happen. And you know, the thing that remote workers like myself are the most left out of is not really the big important decisions, which we'll eventually get an email about, or someone will remember that we exist and they'll tell us about it. But nobody gives us the gossip. Nobody gives us the like discussion of someone's wedding that happened last weekend and how this person went and the food was bad. That's never discussed in the primary part of the meeting, and the primary part of the meeting is where you would Skype in or video chat in. And with the robot, I actually am able to capture those less formal and more spontaneous conversations simply because of that annoying part of having to move through the hallway. And then, you know, in Wired's offices, I don't know if you could see this on the videos, the conference rooms are entirely made of glass, and it's really hard for a robot to see glass. And so I would like suffer the indignity of running into the glass just for the benefit of when I get out of the room, hearing what everyone's chatting about in the hallway and like being more a part of the real social fabric of a team.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Thank you, Emily. Great presentation.
Thank you.
2 questions here, 2 parts. First, what do you see as the major obstacles to adoption of this technology into real offices and industry? And then what do you see as the timeline, the adoption curve? What do you think that would look like?
Yeah, I think that the adoption curve is going to be pretty soon. I really think that, you know, though I have said that the robot that we use, Double Robotics, it's by no means the only telepresence robot on the market. And though I've been talking about some of the limitations it has with Wi-Fi and stuff, it is incredibly useful. And I have heard about, you know, doctors who use it to have consultations with people who are not able to get there. I know a teacher who had a parent-teacher conference with a robot, which I thought was hilarious, and she was very surprised. And that robot had LTE capability, so it didn't have the problem that I had of being tethered to a Wi-Fi network. So I think it's already being adopted, and I think in the larger corporations, you know, where there are thousands of employees, it's already at use. And I don't know if you ever watched the television show The Good Wife, which sadly ended and was so great, but there was an entire season where there was one of these double robotics running around as like a gag, and my friends who are lawyers say that they have some in their office. So I really think this is going to be a real thing. The major limitations, I would say, are people being really off-put by it. Like they think it's funny, but they also would have no desire to do it. And you know, this robot is still at Wired, and I use it. And I am by no means the only remote worker at Wired. And even though it started out as, you know, my robot, there are other people who, once I let go of the grip of the delusion that the robot was me and I didn't want to share the robot with anyone because that would have been weird, like somebody was entering my own robot and I would have felt violated. Once I like let go of that entire psychology of it, I would say to my other remote coworkers, do you guys want to use the robot today? Like, I know you have this important meeting. Do you want to do it? And to a person, they were all too uncomfortable and felt, and you know, I'm actually not that surprised by it because I think there are also a lot of people who are just uncomfortable with the idea of video chatting at all. so often I try to say to people, do you want to FaceTime? Because now I have a young baby, and I'm like, do you want to hang out with me and the baby and FaceTime? And people are like, oh, that makes me uncomfortable. FaceTime makes me nervous. And I think that's one of the major hurdles, is just getting people to be comfortable with it. And then simply just getting the technology to be reliable. Like the main reason I don't use the Mbot every single day is because I can't count on it to work every single day, and that is something that I need to not have to worry about. Like if I could count on it always booting up and always roaming the hallways well and always making it to meetings and not doing the thing that is the worst, which is disconnecting from the Wi-Fi in the middle of a very important conversation so that I miss the thing that somebody thought I was hearing. If I didn't have to worry about that, I would use it all the time. And that's just a simple technological problem to solve. And I think once they solve it, more people will use it. And I hope so, because as much as it's kind of silly and I make a joke of it and it's hilarious looking, it really gives me a freedom to work remotely and could do so for other people, which is a democratizing part of our lives. Not everybody can afford to live in San Francisco. Not everybody can afford to be, or can't be for family reasons, in the place where there are opportunities for employment. And as much as robots are taking our jobs away, I think that this kind of experience with a telepresence robot is one way that we can diversify our employment options.
And what about including it in diversity type trainings?
Sure, we absolutely should do that.
Okay, I got two questions. You sort of answered one of them.
Okay.
Did you ever feel that you were being discriminated against as the robot? And the second one you kind of answered, which is like, if you could pick 3 things that you would improve or add to the robot, what would those be?
Okay. So discriminated against, I would say no. I think the robot actually brings, and for sure when I used it all the time, for those many months that I used it every day, it brought great joy to the office, because you can't really underestimate how much work, whether you love it or not, whether you're inspired by it or not, it at a certain point becomes this like a rote tedium. And the robot was always a constant novelty and source of amusement for everybody. And that, I think, was good. And for that reason, the robot, I think, was actually, Mbot was included in meetings that I don't think I would have been given the conference call login to, just because I know for sure that we would have, advertisers or people come to the office, and they wanted those people to see that we had an office where there was an office robot. And so I would be in those meetings, and halfway through the meeting, I would think to myself, there is no reason for Emily Dreyfuss, editor, to be in this meeting. They just wanted Mbot here. But I think on the flip side, not intentionally, but actually, I think there is discrimination against remote workers. And I think discrimination is probably the wrong word, because it's not malicious, but remote workers are easy to forget. We're literally not there. And so when promotions are given out, and when teams are built, and when decisions are made, we are not in the room and able to assert ourselves. And so it is hard to it's hard to be remembered, and it's hard to be aware of that, and so then have to constantly assert your presence in a way that is not seen as aggressive or self-promoting and annoying. And the robot actually really helped with that, because it's so memorable. No one is going to forget that there is a robot at work. And so I think that it helped me with that. And then, yeah, in terms of improvement, I think just general reliability, all sorts of, like, a gamut of problems, from the speakers and the microphone and the reliability of the network. And the Mbot software is constantly needing to be updated, and it turns out the robot cannot update itself. I can't hit the button. So I think as this technology advances, there really need to be ways for the robot to be more self-sufficient, because it is so dependent on the kindness of humans to keep it maintained. And then I definitely would have liked to have some sort of arms. I don't know if they would have been actually useful, or if I just really wanted them for the novelty of it. I don't know, but I don't care. I really hope that it would have it. And then, yeah, I think that that's it. Just 2 things.
Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Thank you for your fantastic talk.
Thank you.
So I have two questions. So at the end of your talk, I saw that you're kind of thinking how the robot will think. So I was curious, is there a process that making you change from controlling a robot to thinking like it was a part of you? And another question is, during the robot experience, do you think is there any function that will increase the user experience or like make the robots more acceptable by others?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Those are good questions. So yeah, there definitely was a turning point when it stopped being a robot and I started thinking of it as me. And I think that was when I started to use it more. It wasn't the kind of thing that I would just turn on for a meeting and turn off, but when I would rather kind of stay within the robotness and leave the meeting, and instead of going straight back to my dock, I would wander with everyone into the kitchen as they got coffee and we'd keep talking. And also it was just, I think over time, I would realize that in my real life, I had been sitting on my couch without moving for hours. And I like one day in the middle of the summer, I realized it was desperately hot. I didn't have the air conditioner on. I hadn't had anything to drink. I hadn't had lunch, and that was because I had subsumed my own physical self within this computer device and was I was so in Mbot that I had forgotten myself. And I was actually like, there was important breaking news, and I was writing a story, and I was like, sometimes when breaking news happens at Wired, and I'm sure lots of other organizations, will set up what we call like a war room, and everyone who is a part of it will go sit around a table together so that we can all chat. And having Mbot in a situation like that is so great because when things are happening so fast, people don't want to have to IM, and everything is being said aloud. And so I was there like that, and then I realized that even though my adrenaline was so high because it was important breaking news, and I was the one writing it and assigning it and having all these thoughts, as that was happening, I was additionally like on the verge of passing out. And it was like, what is happening? And that was when I realized it was like 105 degrees and I hadn't turned the air conditioner on and I hadn't had any water, and I had forgotten my human body. So that was definitely the turning point. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
So is there any function that would increase the user experience or make people feel that it's more real?
Oh, yeah. Well, the hands thing, I got that request from a lot of people. They were the ones who wanted me to have hands more, I think, than I did. And it really was because there was this instinct to shake my hand that I think made people feel really uncomfortable, that there wasn't anything to touch. And I also would get the request, and this made me uncomfortable, but this I think people thought would be good for them, the request to put the Mbot in an outfit. They wanted it to wear a shirt and pants, which I just thought that was going too far. But yeah, no, I think like all things, probably just the more common that they are and the more people see them, the more people will feel comfortable with them. And right now they're rare enough that people don't know about it.
Two-part question. A, did you ever meet Mbot? And B, what was or what would have been the emotional, personal reaction to that?
Yeah. Okay, so yes. Well, no. I didn't ever meet the real Mbot because by the time Mbot had the seizure and then was carted away, I had not gotten to go out to San Francisco. But I met the second robot, the current robot. And yeah, it was a really amazing moment for me, kind of, because I got to go and stand in the corner and look out the window that it was always looking out, and I just kind of felt like, well, I've been here with you all along. And I actually really wanted to, for this talk, have the robot come here and be on stage with me, and then I was gonna do like a very gimmicky thing where it would roll out and we would meet each other and it would be like slow motion. But that was really expensive, so we didn't do it. But yeah, there was, I think if I had gotten to meet real Mbot, that would have been really weird, but I didn't, and I had already given up my insanity by then.
Thanks. This has been really interesting. You mentioned that when you first had Mbot, you were 7 months pregnant.
Yes.
And I was thinking back when I was pregnant with my first child and how the world just seemed so different to me because I had this life inside of me. And I wondered if you had similar feelings and if any of that reflected on how you viewed the robot.
You know, that's a great question. Like, maybe part of the reason why I so empathized with and had this like heightened emotional reaction to the robot is definitely possibly because my body was coursing with hormones. And you know, I don't know. I'm not sure if that was true, but I definitely did. I had this acute, it was more acute than it would have been had I not been pregnant, the awareness that Mbot was this like piece of machinery that had no life, and I was the epitome of life. Not only did I have sentience and blood and thoughts, I was doing the most human thing a human ever does, which is build another human. And as I was doing that, I was also dehumanizing myself and becoming a robot. And it was that, I think, the contrast was so stark that it was definitely on the top of my mind a lot. And I think that's also why when I started to think about how Mbot only existed in a certain sphere, you know, we humans, we work, but we're also a wife or a daughter or a mother, and we have all of these different categories of existence, and that fills out who we are as a human. It made me sad that Mbot had one category, and that was to be a productive worker. And I think that was definitely made more acute to me because I was pregnant. Yeah, for sure. Yep. Okay, thank you guys.